7 books down in January and 1 DNF, so 8 reviews to give today. This is my January reading wrap, and I'll tell you, I am quite pleased with how this month went. So part of my strategy this year was to eliminate my reading goal, which I felt would remove the barrier regarding taking down really big books. So it's the year of the thick boy, and I read 3 chunkers in January. 7 books is probably my lowest number that I've read in a month going back over a year, but with it being by design and with how much I enjoyed soaking in these door stoppers, I have 0 regrets. And I've stated that number 3 times now, so I want to note something. If you read 1 book a month, you're reading more than the average American, and you should be proud of that. This is not a competition, and I've been in your position before. This is my job now, so I read when I want. I make content when I want. I'm fortunate enough to have that freedom and time. I also did a video called How to Read More, where I go over my routine and some tips. So if you're wanting to take your reading to the next level, check that out. And while you're here, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, ringing the bell, subbing to the channel, that's if you're enjoying the content and feel compelled to do so. No pressure. Just watching this right now is a form of support that I greatly appreciate. Oh, and while you're here, let me know the best book that you read in January and why. All right, let's start the show. Usually on my short form channels, I work from lowest to highest rated. I'm going to switch that up. I'm going to start with my favorite read of the month and work my way down. So we're going to start out with some positive vibes. The best book I read in January, and already a strong contender for the best book I'll read all year, is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Now, I have never been the biggest fan of Westerns, but reading this along with my 3rd playthrough of Red Dead Redemption 2 has made me a believer. And I know the size of this can be daunting. It's about 850 pages. It's a certified thick boy, but the pages flew by as I became more immersed and absorbed by the story. And that story follows a group of retired Texas Rangers in the Old West as they drive a cattle herd from Texas to Montana. I loved the writing style McMurtry used here. It's vivid and breathtaking despite its simplicity. It's not overly stylized or indulgent. It's efficient and effective. And if I've said it once, I've said it 100 times before, I am a character-driven reader. For me to be truly invested in a book, I need the characters to sing. And that is the main strength of this book. This uses the 3rd-person omniscient point of view. As a reader, we get access to the thoughts of multiple characters, we explore their backstories, and gain a greater understanding of the story at large with that context and information. And these characters are 3-dimensional, they are complicated, they are perfectly realized. They run the gamut from the mostly pure to mostly evil. Their actions match their motivations, their interactions and dialogue are brilliantly executed, and I found their arcs and development utterly compelling. Each one has stories within the story, and they are characters that, whether you love them or hate them, will stick with you for a long time. If you make the choice to read this and you're already fully invested by page 200 or 300 like I was, you are in for such a treat, such a journey. It's a slow burn, yes, but as it progresses and the tone shifts and the stakes get higher and higher, and you get this building tension and danger with threats both real and imagined, it's so rewarding. When the fireworks start popping off, it is suspenseful and thrilling, and I could not put down the second half. I mean, I read the last 200 pages of this book throughout the course of a single Sunday because I had to know how it would all shake out. This has everything you want in a novel. It's heartwarming and brutal, cozy and shocking. You will laugh, you'll cry. It is an unforgettable masterpiece. 5 stars easy, 6 stars, 10 stars. There are not enough stars to capture how much I loved Lonesome Dove. My other 5-star read of January was Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, which is book 2 in Live Ship Traders. This is the 2nd series in the massive Realm of the Elderlings world. Now, the first series in this world is Farseer. I did a review of that when I talked about the series that I completed in 2024, and this series is a departure from that in a few ways. For example, you follow completely different characters and you switch from first-person POV to third-person limited, which I personally prefer. I'm going to do a full review of this series when I complete it. I'm already taking bites out of Ship of Destiny on the side, and it'll be the next book that I fully dive into, so that shouldn't take too long, even though it's another thick boy, and that's coming in at around 850 pages. So with that said, I will keep this brief with a few notes. This is a clear step up from Ship of Magic, which was book 1. Ship of Magic struggled to find its footing at first and suffered from even slower pacing than I'm used to from Robin Hobb. And look, I love a good slow burn, but I think even the most hardcore Hobb fans will admit that it was slower than it needed to be. Mad Ship's pacing, on the other hand, was pitch perfect. And this is where we finally get to see the potential of this world and the characters within it. Speaking of the characters, Hobb is on my Mount Rushmore of authors that can make me connect with characters, and her work in Mad Ship only solidified that status. I was questioning everything I thought I knew about them. I completely flipped my opinion on a few of them, and it wasn't because of any one like shocking moment or plot twist. It was this gradual thing. It was the mounting evidence built brick by brick that made me reconsider my thoughts on them. It was masterfully done. So again, I'll get to a full review of this series soon, but for now, I'll just say this was 5 stars. Hobb continues to deliver huge results in her trilogy's book 2s. I'm not a huge short story reader, so I don't have a solid frame of reference for rating them, so I'm just going to throw it in here. I'm talking about Sharp Ends by Joe Abercrombie. This is the 7th book in the First Law world. In the publication order, you get the initial First Law trilogy, the 3 standalones, and then you wedge this in before the final trilogy, which is Age of Madness. I did a full review for Age of Madness in that video I mentioned before, where I talk about this series I completed in 2024, if you want more on that. Now, chronologically, this has stories predating the initial trilogy, giving you backstories on some of the main characters from that story, and it bounces around the timeline, taking you all the way up to and a little bit through the end of book 6, which is Red Country. What makes this so enjoyable is Abercrombie's ability to get you in a character's head and flesh them out in a snap, which is necessary for the short story format. In 500 words or less, nobody can establish a character POV like Lord Grimdark, period. And that's what makes this collection work when it has so many POVs, both new and old. And in terms of new POVs, Javra needs her own standalone novel. She is incredible. You might ask if you can skip this and go right to Age of Madness, and like, sure, you could, but I wouldn't. This is such an important, thought-provoking work regarding human history that challenges traditional narratives, offers new theories, and asks fascinating questions. So let's talk about The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity by David Graeber and David Wengrow. This is written by an anthropologist and an archaeologist, and their aim is to rewrite how social organization and political structures evolved over time by debunking the theory that human societies evolved in an unavoidable straight line from hunter-gatherers to inevitable statehood due to the invention of agriculture, essentially arguing that humans had more agency than previously believed, that they established a variety of complex, flexible systems of power, and that they were not destined for our current reality where the world is carved up and divided by imaginary borders, and that we still, as a species, have the capacity to upend that current reality based on evidence from the previous quote-unquote primitive societies. The too long didn't read is that this is a pushback against determinism, which is a theory that you'll see in popular books like Guns, Germs, and Steel, which I feel is probably the weakest example of this in that its arguments are an inch deep and a mile wide, not really amounting to anything. So if you read the book from Jared Diamond, I would recommend challenging what you learn from that with The Dawn of Everything. That comparison aside, there are arguments made here that are both strong and weak, and I don't think you need to agree with everything in this to understand the value in the questions it presents. For instance, I think it fails in answering the question of, if a world dominated by states was not inevitable, how did we get here? But even in that, there's a ton to unpack and theorize about. And overall, I found most of the theories and counter-arguments well-crafted. It's hard to rate a book like this because it's hard to factor in how important it is with a simple number score. From here on out, when discussing these topics, the theories presented in this book will have to be considered and either supported, rejected, or questioned. At the same time, there's still so much to learn about how all of this fits together, and we're constantly finding new things that challenge traditional narratives and alter the way that we think of human history. I gave it 4.25 stars, and again, I think that matters less than the impact that it has. So yeah, I would recommend giving it a shot if it's an area that interests you. We're going to drastically switch gears again here. This novella was cozy and surprisingly deep. Winter in Sokcho by Eliza Shua-Dusapin. I probably butchered that, but anyway, the story follows the life of a young woman with French-Korean roots who works in a quaint guest house in a beautiful coastal town of Sokcho, South Korea. Things get interesting when she crosses paths with a French comic book artist, and he's looking for creative inspiration, and their meeting sparks a deep and sometimes complicated connection that causes her to reconsider who she is and what connection and being seen means to her. This book really snuck up on me. I mean, I was having a decent time with it, and at about halfway through, I was at a point where I could probably take or leave it, but then the meaning of this book started to burrow its way into my brain ball, which in a way mirrored our main protagonist here, because she's kind of just listlessly going through the motions. And then as the story progresses, she starts pulling out all of these various strands and questioning these different aspects of herself. And the more I think about this after reading it, the higher my rating goes. And I think that's a mark of a really good book. It doesn't always have to be so obvious, but over time it just sticks with you. Initially, I gave this 3.25 stars. In my short form wrap up, I bumped it to 3.5. And over the course of mapping out my thoughts on it and thinking about it more, I would not argue against 3.75 stars, which, given how I rate novellas and the fact that you could read this in a single sitting, that's some really doggone good bang for your buck. This was a fun ride, but not much else. Let's talk about the Fantasy Sickos Book Club book for January, The Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. This story revolves around Kinch, and it's told from the first-person perspective. Kinch is in a pinch. He's a thief who has a student loan debt that he owes to the Takers Guild, who taught him his craft. Things quickly spiral out of control as his next target turns out to be quite skilled, and he gets entangled in this quest to journey across a crazy world infested by weird creatures to help find a queen. Let's talk pros and cons. For the pros, Kinch has a consistent voice, and his wisecracking brings levity to everything. It also pulls off the stream of consciousness style without getting too fragmented. The magic system has interesting quirks that felt fresh and unique, which also helped the action scenes, which were well written and had great energy. It at times feels like a D&D session, which keeps the episodic nature of it interesting. The romantic subplot was surprisingly heartwarming and interesting and did its best to hold together on an even middle. And I'm a sucker for animal companions, and this has a great one. For the cons, the various cultures of the world were interesting and well fleshed out, but the early info dumping about them was unnecessarily complicated and unmemorable. There's clear grimdark influences here that Buehlman pulls from for this, but he doesn't execute on their level. The side characters blended into each other. So many of them had the same characteristics and humor. And probably my biggest gripe, the plot spends long stretches going absolutely nowhere, and overall the plot wasn't compelling. Your level of enjoyment with this will depend on how you connect with Kinch and the humor, and if you can excuse a thin plot. And for the most part, I still enjoyed this and had a good time, but I don't think I'll ever think about it again. Thankfully, it's not long enough to wear out its welcome, so I'm going to slap this puppy with a 3.25 star rating with a super soft yes recommendation. If you're interested in Buehlman, I would definitely recommend his excellent Between Two Fires before recommending this. The History Sickos Book Club read for January was Pandoras Jar, Women in Greek Myths by Natalie Haynes. This promised to be a, quote, fascinating, eye-opening take on the remarkable women at the heart of classical stories in Greek mythology, from Helen of Troy to Pandora and the Amazons to Medea, end quote. There is a 4-star book in here, and it lives in the first half of each chapter, where Haynes recaps the origins of these women's stories and how they've been distorted over time to give us the image of these figures that we have today. And in that, she's mostly convincing as she takes on the role of what one of our sickos called a defense lawyer. For instance, when you put a microscope to Medusa, can she really be blamed for any of it? And there are a few chapters like this that really shine and make you think. There's also a 2-star book in here, and it lives in the second half of each chapter, where Haynes continues to build her case for the reframing of these stories while recapping how these figures are presented in modern media. It's like that Wikipedia section labeled in popular culture. And that's where comparisons like to Beyonce or Buffy the Vampire Slayer didn't resonate with me. And while there were a few chapters that were convincing, like the aforementioned Medusa chapter or the Pandora chapter, there are a few that presented fairly flimsy cases. So overall, what you have is a mixed bag. Your level of knowledge regarding Greek mythology will likely color your experience with this one. I came into it with a decent base, and for me, it was a flat 3-star rating. That said, I think Haynes is a talented, witty writer, and I wouldn't shy away from her other works. And finally, we have Confessions, which is my first DNF of the year, and I recently talked about why I didn't finish this on my short form platform, so I'll go ahead and run that video and give an update after that. I have my first DNF of the year, which is disappointing, but I was also terrible at setting down books that weren't gripping me right away last year, so I want to do more of that this year, even as I hope it's not required often. Anyway, the book is Confessions. This is a translated Japanese suspense novel where you've got this school teacher seeking revenge for the death of her child, which was caused by 2 of her students. Now, that's a really intriguing premise, and the reviews on it are great, but I'm putting it down 45 pages in because the device being used, the narrative choice, is driving me bonkers. So this teacher has this class gathered round for this lecture about her side of the story. She's telling it from the beginning, so we're getting her dialogue for the whole thing, but we aren't getting anybody else's. So instead, we have the teacher stopping to address questions, but it reads like this. What's that? You don't think the story is that simple? You found the woman, the heroine, more sympathetic than I made her sound? I can understand that. Like, the impression I get is that these students are like close enough to her to hear all of her questions, kind of like it's pictured on the cover. So why is she addressing everyone like a stand-up comic doing crowd work? And this happens so much. And on top of that, the way she is talking to the students does not feel like dialogue at all. It feels like her inner monologue. It's just coming off like so rigid and inauthentic to me. Like, people don't talk like this, especially to kids. And for those reasons, I'm out. My update here is I watched the movie that night, which I can only find in like super low resolution on YouTube. And yeah, it worked better in that medium. I enjoyed it. It was crazy and dark and executed really well. As a bonus for the manga I finished the Berserk Deluxe Edition Volume 1. I'll have more extensive thoughts on this when I finish the Golden Age arc, which I've only just begun because I'm told that's where things really start to cook with gas. The Deluxe Edition has the first 3 volumes contained in it, and I'll probably give a composite rating of like 3.5 stars. But it's such a wild, wacky story so far that I am definitely sold on continuing it. I also finished the first volume of Death Note, with the first 2 volumes being included in the Black Edition, and I am well into the second volume. I'm reading this while rewatching the series for like the 3rd time, and so far I'm finding that the show is a really faithful adaptation. No major thoughts yet because it's so early in the manga, but I am almost positive that I'm going to love it. So that's 7 books, 1 DNF, 4 volumes of manga read in January, and my thoughts on all of it. I'd love to hear if you've read any of these, if you have thoughts on them, if you agree or disagree. So that's it for the January recap. I thank you for watching this far. I appreciate you joining me. I'll see you on the next one.